Diana Frances Spencer was born into British aristocracy on July 1, 1961, but her childhood was anything but the fairy tale the world would later imagine. Park House, the Spencer family estate on the Queen's Sandringham property, should have been idyllic. Instead, it became the setting for a family disintegration that would shape Diana's entire psychology and prepare her, in the cruelest way possible, for the emotional brutality she'd face as Princess of Wales. The Spencer family's aristocratic credentials exceeded those of the Windsors themselves. Diana's lineage traced back through centuries of English nobility. Her ancestors had served monarchs for generations. The Spencers weren't newcomers to power. They were part of the establishment that made monarchy possible. This pedigree mattered enormously in the calculus that would later make Diana an acceptable royal bride. But aristocratic credentials couldn't protect Diana from the trauma that defined her early years. When Diana was 6, her mother Frances left the family, abandoning Diana and her siblings to pursue a relationship with wallpaper heir Peter Shand Kidd. The departure wasn't quiet or amicable. It was a scandal that consumed the family and left deep psychological scars. Diana remembered listening to the gravel crunch under her mother's feet as Frances walked away from Park House. That sound became a defining memory, representing abandonment, loss, and the unreliability of love. Diana's relationship with her mother never fully recovered. The wound remained open throughout her life, influencing every romantic relationship and feeding the desperate need for affection that would characterize her adult years. The custody battle that followed was vicious and public. Diana's father, Earl Spencer, fought Frances for the children, deploying his aristocratic connections and resources. Frances's own mother testified against her daughter in court, siding with Spencer and effectively ensuring he won custody. This betrayal by her grandmother devastated Frances and, by extension, traumatized Diana, who witnessed her family destroying itself in legal proceedings. Diana and her siblings remained at Park House with their father, but the household was broken. Earl Spencer struggled with his own demons, eventually remarrying Reine, Countess of Dartmouth, a woman Diana and her siblings despised. The children called her Acid Reine behind her back, resenting her attempts to insert herself into their mother's place. The family dynamics were toxic, teaching Diana that home was a battlefield, not a sanctuary. Education provided little refuge. Diana attended Riddlesworth Hall and later West Heath boarding school, where she struggled academically. She failed her O-level examinations twice, showing little aptitude for traditional academics. This academic failure reinforced Diana's sense of inadequacy and convinced her that she lacked intelligence, a belief that would later make her vulnerable to the dismissive treatment she'd received from the royal family. But Diana possessed emotional intelligence and social intuition that far exceeded her academic capabilities. She understood people intuitively, reading emotions and responding with genuine empathy. These skills, developed partly as survival mechanisms in her fractured family, would later make her an extraordinary humanitarian and public figure. Diana's greatest strengths emerged from her deepest wounds. Her relationship with her father deteriorated after he remarried. Diana felt pushed aside, replaced by Reine in her father's affections. The Earl's stroke in 1978 brought Reine even more centrally into family affairs, as she managed his care and the estate. Diana felt increasingly alienated in what should have been her family home. She learned early that institutions, whether families or later monarchies, protected themselves and their power structures, not vulnerable individuals. Diana's own romantic life began inauspiciously. She had crushes and brief relationships, but nothing serious before meeting Prince Charles. She lacked the sexual experience that royal watchers later pretended to value in potential princesses, but actually feared. Diana's relative innocence wasn't accidental. It was precisely what made her acceptable to the royal family as breeding stock for future monarchs. The Spencer family's proximity to the royal family at Sandringham meant Diana had encountered the Windsors throughout childhood. She'd met Prince Charles occasionally, though he was 12 years older and had actually dated her older sister Sarah. These early encounters meant nothing romantically. Charles was an adult while Diana was a child. But they established familiarity that would later be reframed as destiny. By 1980, Diana was working in London as a kindergarten assistant, sharing a flat with friends, and living a relatively normal upper-class life. She enjoyed working with children, finding in them the uncomplicated affection she'd craved since her mother's departure. Diana was good with children because she understood vulnerability and responded to need without judgment. These same qualities would later make her a revolutionary royal. When Prince Charles began showing interest in Diana during the summer of 1980, she was utterly unprepared for what this attention meant. Charles was the heir to the British throne, the most eligible bachelor in the world, and a man under enormous pressure to marry and produce heirs. Diana was 19, emotionally wounded, academically limited, and desperate for love that would fill the void her mother's departure had created. The power imbalance was staggering. Charles was 31, worldly, educated, and backed by the full apparatus of the British monarchy. Diana was a teenager with limited life experience beyond aristocratic circles and deep psychological vulnerabilities. Charles was choosing a wife under institutional pressure to produce heirs. Diana was seeking a love that would heal childhood trauma. These asymmetrical motivations guaranteed disaster. Diana didn't understand that she was being evaluated as breeding stock, not courted as a romantic partner. The royal family needed an acceptable vessel for future monarchs, someone with aristocratic credentials, no scandalous past, and enough malleability to conform to royal demands. Diana's youth, inexperience, and desperate need for affection made her perfect for this role in ways that confident, mature women would not have been. Royal courtiers observed Diana during the courtship, assessing her suitability. They noted her family background, impeccable, her sexual history, apparently non-existent, her personality, compliant and eager to please, her intelligence, limited enough not to cause problems. Every evaluation treated Diana as an object to be acquired, not a person to be valued. She was passing tests she didn't know she was taking for a role she didn't understand. Diana's friends and family noticed her transformation during the courtship. She became anxious and uncertain, sensing something wrong but unable to articulate it. The press attention was overwhelming. Photographers followed her constantly, camped outside her flat, and pursued her through London. Diana was experiencing the media scrutiny that would define and ultimately destroy her life, and she was facing it alone without preparation or protection. Charles's attentions were sporadic and confusing. He would pursue Diana intensely, then disappear for weeks. She didn't know that he was maintaining his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles throughout the courtship. Diana believed she was entering a conventional romance. Charles was managing multiple relationships while yielding to institutional pressure to marry appropriately. Diana was a means to an end, providing heirs and performing royal duties, not the love of Charles's life. The proposal came in February 1981, just 6 months after Charles had begun seriously courting Diana. She was 19 and a half, still a teenager in most meaningful ways. Charles was 32, nearly twice her age. The proposal wasn't romantic, it was transactional. Charles needed a wife. Diana needed to be loved. Neither was getting what they actually needed, but both convinced themselves the arrangement would work. Diana's response to the proposal revealed her psychological state. She laughed, not from joy, but from nervousness and disbelief. She was being offered a fairy tale that some part of her recognized as a trap. But Diana's desperate need for love, her conditioning to please authority figures, and her lack of life experience meant she said yes. She was accepting a role she couldn't understand to marry a man she barely knew who loved someone else. The engagement announcement triggered a media frenzy that would never truly end. Diana's face appeared on every newspaper and magazine. Photographers competed for images. The world fell in love with the shy teenager marrying a prince. Nobody asked whether Diana had the emotional resources to handle what was coming. Nobody questioned whether a 19-year-old should be marrying into an institution as demanding and unforgiving as the British monarchy. Diana's aristocratic background had prepared her for many things, but not this. She understood social hierarchy, formal behavior, and institutional expectations. But she didn't understand media manipulation, public performance under constant scrutiny, or the emotional isolation of royal life. Diana was entering a prison disguised as a palace, and everyone involved, from her family to the royal family to the media, was complicit in locking the door. Arranged spectacle. The engagement period between February and July 1981 should have been joyous preparation for marriage. Instead, it became Diana's introduction to the cruelty and indifference that characterized the royal family's treatment of her. She moved into Clarence's house, nominally for protection and proximity, but actually for observation and control. Diana was being processed, not prepared. Royal courtiers began Diana's training in royal protocol and behavior. These sessions weren't educational, they were indoctrination. Diana learned to walk differently, speak carefully, and suppress her natural personality. The message was clear: who Diana was naturally wasn't acceptable. She needed to become someone else, someone suitable for royal performance. This demand to erase herself and adopt an approved persona was psychologically devastating. Diana's bulimia began during the engagement period. The eating disorder, which would plague her throughout her marriage, emerged as a response to the stress, control, and emotional neglect she was experiencing. Diana felt her life spiraling beyond her control. Bulimia provided an illusion of control. She could control what entered her body and what left it. The disorder was a symptom of deeper trauma, a coping mechanism for unbearable psychological pressure. Nobody in the royal household addressed Diana's deteriorating mental state. They noticed her weight loss. Diana dropped from a size 12 to a size 10 within months, but they attributed it to wedding stress or dismissed it as vanity. The possibility that Diana was suffering psychologically didn't occur to them, or, more likely, didn't concern them. She was performing her role adequately. Her internal state was irrelevant. Charles was largely absent during the engagement. He continued his regular schedule of royal duties, leaving Diana alone in Clarence's house for days at a time. When present, he was distant and preoccupied. Diana later learned he was maintaining contact with Camilla Parker Bowles throughout this period, even arranging a private meeting days before the wedding. Diana was preparing to marry a man whose emotional commitment was elsewhere. The discovery of Charles's continued attachment to Camilla devastated Diana. She found cufflinks Charles had commissioned for Camilla, 2 interlocking CS. The gift's intimacy and the timing of its delivery just before the wedding made the message unmistakable. Camilla remained central to Charles's emotional life. Diana confronted Charles, who dismissed her concerns. She was trapped. The wedding was arranged. The world was watching. Backing out seemed impossible. Diana later said she wanted to cancel the wedding but felt she couldn't. Her face was already on tea towels and souvenirs. The public was invested in the fairy tale. Disappointing them seemed worse than marrying a man who loved someone else. This reasoning revealed Diana's conditioning to prioritize others' expectations over her own welfare. She was entering a marriage she knew was doomed because she couldn't bear disappointing strangers. The wedding preparations proceeded with industrial efficiency. St. Paul's Cathedral was selected over Westminster Abbey for its larger capacity, 500 guests rather than 2,000. This wasn't a wedding, it was a state spectacle requiring maximum audience. Diana's preferences were largely irrelevant. She was the bride, but this was the monarchy's event, not hers. Diana's wedding dress became iconic, but its creation was another source of stress. The Emmanuel design featured enormous puff sleeves, a 25-foot train, and thousands of pearls and sequins. The dress weighed pounds and required careful choreography to manage. Diana worried constantly about tripping, snagging the train, or otherwise ruining the visual spectacle. Even her clothing was a burden, not a joy. The night before the wedding, Diana barely slept. She was terrified, uncertain, and desperately seeking reassurance that never came. Charles spent the evening with friends, relaxed and unconcerned. The emotional asymmetry was complete. Diana was confronting the biggest moment of her life with terror and doubt. Charles was fulfilling a duty and maintaining his schedule. They weren't entering marriage as partners. They were performing assigned roles. July 29, 1981, was declared a national holiday. An estimated 750 million people worldwide watched the wedding on television. London streets overflowed with crowds. The spectacle was magnificent: horse-drawn carriages, military uniforms, aristocratic guests, and at the center, a nervous 19-year-old in a fairy tale dress marrying a prince who loved someone else. Diana's journey to St. Paul's in the glass coach showcased her to massive crowds. She waved and smiled, performing perfectly despite her terror. The public saw a beautiful bride embracing her destiny. Nobody saw the desperate young woman who'd lost control of her life. The performance was already consuming the person. The ceremony itself was grand and traditional. Diana famously mixed up Charles's names during the vows, saying Philip Charles instead of Charles Philip Arthur George. The mistake was attributed to nerves and became an endearing detail in the fairy tale narrative. Diana knew it revealed how unprepared and overwhelmed she truly was. She was promising her life to a man whose name she couldn't recall correctly under stress. Charles and Diana's balcony kiss at Buckingham Palace became one of the most iconic images in royal history. The crowd demanded the kiss, chanting until Charles obliged with a brief peck. The kiss looked romantic to observers. Diana experienced it as performance under pressure. Even intimate moments were public spectacles requiring careful choreography. Nothing in her life would be truly private again. The wedding breakfast at Buckingham Palace proceeded according to protocol. Speeches were made, toasts offered, and formalities observed. Diana smiled and performed throughout, while her bulimia continued in private. She was already living the double life that would characterize her years as Princess of Wales, public perfection masking private suffering. The honeymoon began aboard the royal yacht Britannia, cruising the Mediterranean. This should have been romantic privacy, but royal staff accompanied them, and Charles brought books about spiritual philosophy to read instead of focusing on his new wife. Diana later described the honeymoon as when she realized the truth about her marriage. Charles's emotional unavailability was complete. He'd fulfilled his duty by marrying appropriately. Romance wasn't part of the transaction. Charles and Camilla reportedly spoke by phone during the honeymoon. Charles wasn't even pretending to prioritize his marriage. Diana was discovering that she'd entered an arrangement where her feelings and needs were irrelevant. She'd been acquired to perform functions, produce heirs, fulfill royal duties, maintain public image. Her emotional welfare wasn't part of the royal family's calculations. Diana returned from honeymoon pregnant with Prince William. The pregnancy was welcomed as confirmation that she could fulfill her primary function, producing heirs. Diana's own experience of the pregnancy was secondary. She suffered severe morning sickness and continued struggling with bulimia. The pregnancy was physically and emotionally difficult, but public performance continued. Diana was learning that her physical and mental health mattered less than maintaining appearances. The pregnancy also triggered Charles's jealousy and resentment. Media attention shifted to Diana, making her the star while Charles became supporting cast. This dynamic would poison their marriage. Charles had expected a compliant wife who would support his work while remaining in the background. Diana's charisma and natural connection with the public made her the center of attention. Charles resented being overshadowed in what he considered his domain. Diana's popularity with the public exploded during pregnancy. She represented youth, beauty, and accessibility in contrast to the stuffy, distant royal family. People connected with Diana in ways they never had with previous royals. She seemed genuine, warm, and relatable. This authenticity that endeared Diana to the public threatened the royal family's carefully controlled image and Charles's ego. Clarence House and palace staff observed Diana's struggles but offered no meaningful support. They viewed her emotional difficulties as character weakness, not institutional failure. Diana needed psychological support, compassionate guidance, and genuine care. She received protocol instructions and criticism. The institution protected itself and its routines. Diana was expected to adapt, regardless of cost. By the time Prince William was born in June 1982, Diana had already learned the fundamental truth of her position. She was valuable for what she produced and the image she projected. Who she was as a person, her feelings, needs, and suffering, was irrelevant to the institution she'd married into. The fairy tale wedding had been a spectacular deception, hiding the prison she'd entered and the suffering that awaited her. Palace Prison Kensington Palace became Diana's primary residence after William's birth, but the grand apartments were more prison than home. The walls were thick with history and protocol. Every room carried expectations about how princess should behave. Diana was surrounded by staff, yet utterly alone. She had entered an institution designed to contain and control her, disguised as privilege and protection. Royal protocol governed Diana's every action. How she dressed, where she went, whom she saw, what she said, everything required approval or occurred under observation. Diana couldn't leave the palace without security. She couldn't meet friends without staff knowledge. She couldn't express opinions publicly without royal permission. The control was total and suffocating. Diana had traded her freedom for a title, and there was no reversing the transaction. The postpartum period after William's birth was brutal. Diana suffered what was likely severe postpartum depression, though the royal family refused to acknowledge mental health issues openly. Diana felt desperate, overwhelmed, and increasingly suicidal. She later described throwing herself downstairs while pregnant with William and cutting her arms and legs with Charles's penknife. These weren't serious suicide attempts. They were desperate cries for help. Nobody responded appropriately. Charles's reaction to Diana's mental health crisis was dismissive and cruel. He told her she was crying wolf, seeking attention, being manipulative. The possibility that his wife was genuinely suffering didn't seem to occur to him. Charles had grown up in an emotionally cold environment where feelings were suppressed and psychological suffering was weakness. He had no resources for supporting Diana's mental health because the royal family didn't acknowledge such needs existed. The royal family's attitude toward mental health was shaped by their own history. They'd institutionalized the Queen Mother's nieces, Catherine and Nerissa Bowes-Lyon, in a psychiatric hospital and literally erased them from public record, listing them as dead. This was how the Windsors handled mental illness, through denial, concealment, and institutionalization. Diana was experiencing the same institutional cruelty, just in different form. Diana's bulimia intensified during this period. She was binging and purging multiple times daily, unable to control the cycle. The eating disorder provided the illusion of control in a life where she controlled nothing. It also expressed the rage and despair she couldn't voice. Diana was literally trying to expel the pain consuming her from inside. Charles noticed but did nothing. Staff knew but said nothing. Diana suffered alone while surrounded by people. Motherhood became Diana's salvation and her greatest joy. William provided unconditional love that Diana craved desperately. She could pour into him the affection she'd never received. Diana broke royal protocol by being hands-on with William rather than leaving him to nanas. She insisted on taking William on royal tours rather than leaving him behind. Diana was determined to give her children the maternal love she'd been denied. But even motherhood became a battleground. The royal family criticized Diana's approach as too emotional, too involved, too common. They wanted William raised in traditional royal fashion, by nanas and schools, with emotional distance and formal relationships. Diana fought these expectations, creating conflicts that further isolated her within the family. Her determination to be a different kind of mother was revolutionary and threatening to royal traditions. Charles was an absent and disengaged father. He fulfilled obligatory appearances but left actual childcare to Diana and staff. Charles's own upbringing had been emotionally cold, and he simply repeated patterns learned from his parents. Diana's warmth and involvement highlighted Charles's deficiencies, creating further resentment. The marriage was disintegrating around fundamental incompatibilities and unmet needs. Diana's relationship with the Queen was formal and distant. Elizabeth II was not a warm or emotionally supportive figure. She'd survived as monarch by suppressing feelings and prioritizing duty. Diana's emotionality and need for support seemed like weakness to Elizabeth. The Queen offered no guidance, comfort, or understanding. Diana had married into a family incapable of providing the emotional support she desperately needed. Prince Philip's treatment of Diana was particularly cruel. He wrote her letters criticizing her behavior and defending Charles. When Diana complained about Charles's relationship with Camilla, Philip suggested that she was being unreasonable. He maintained that many aristocratic marriages involved discreet affairs and that Diana should accept this arrangement. Philip was telling Diana to tolerate emotional abuse and infidelity as normal aristocratic behavior. Diana felt trapped completely. Divorce was unthinkable. The Church of England, which the Queen headed, opposed it. Leaving would mean abandoning her children to the institution. Staying meant continuing to suffer. Diana had no good options. The institution had her locked in a situation where every choice involved loss and pain. Media scrutiny intensified the pressure. Photographers followed Diana constantly. Her every outfit, expression, and gesture was analyzed. The press coverage was initially positive. Diana was portrayed as a fairy tale princess, but the constant attention was invasive and exhausting. Diana couldn't appear in public without performing perfectly. The pressure to maintain the fairy tale image while privately suffering was unbearable. Diana began using the media strategically, understanding that public image provided power within the royal system. She learned to dress dramatically for important events, knowing photographs would dominate coverage. She developed relationships with certain photographers, controlling her image while seeming to submit to media attention. Diana was learning to weaponize the same media scrutiny that oppressed her. Charles resented Diana's media success bitterly. Public events became competitions where Diana inevitably won. Her warmth and natural charisma contrasted with Charles's stiffness and formality. Crowds chanted for Diana and seemed disappointed when Charles appeared. This dynamic humiliated Charles and created a vicious cycle where his resentment made him colder, which made Diana more appealing by comparison. The shy Di image that launched Diana's public career eventually became constraining. Diana was complex, wounded but strong, vulnerable but determined, suffering but increasingly angry. The media's simplistic narratives couldn't capture her actual personality. Diana was trapped between the fairy tale the public wanted and the reality she was living. Neither version was completely true, but the fairy tale sold newspapers while the truth threatened the monarchy. Marriage collapsed by 1986. The marriage between Charles and Diana had collapsed beyond any pretense of functionality. They maintained appearances for public consumption, but privately, the relationship was dead. Charles had essentially abandoned any effort to make the marriage work. Diana was spiraling into deeper depression, more severe bulimia, and increasing desperation. The facade was crumbling, and both knew it couldn't hold indefinitely. Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles became increasingly overt. Phone calls were frequent and lengthy. Charles arranged meetings that palace staff couldn't plausibly deny. He commissioned portraits of Camilla and wore her gifts publicly. Charles wasn't hiding the affair anymore. He was simply not caring whether Diana knew. The disrespect was complete and intentional. The Camillagate tapes, recorded in 1989 but published later, revealed the depth of Charles and Camilla's relationship. The intimate phone conversation included sexual content and Charles expressing wishes to be Camilla's tampon. The tapes were humiliating for everyone involved, but they confirmed what Diana had known for years. Charles's emotional and physical commitment was to Camilla, not his wife. Diana was the third person in her own marriage. Diana's discovery of the extent of Charles and Camilla's relationship was gradual and torturous. She found letters, interrupted phone calls, and noticed jewelry gifts. Each discovery was a fresh wound, confirming her suspicions while making her question her sanity. Charles denied everything, calling Diana paranoid and unstable. This gaslighting, making Diana doubt her own perceptions, was psychologically abusive and damaging. Diana confronted Camilla directly at a party in 1989. She told Camilla she knew about the affair and asked her to leave Charles alone. Camilla reportedly responded by denying the relationship and suggesting Diana was imagining things. But Diana persisted, telling Camilla there were 3 people in the marriage and it was crowded. This confrontation was brave and desperate, Diana demanding acknowledgement of reality everyone else denied. The confrontation changed nothing. Charles and Camilla continued their relationship. Charles blamed Diana for creating scenes and embarrassing him. The palace machinery protected Charles while portraying Diana as unstable and difficult. Diana was fighting an institution that would always prioritize the heir to the throne over his disposable wife. She couldn't win this battle through direct confrontation. Diana's mental health deteriorated further. Her bulimia was out of control. She was making superficial cuts on her arms and legs, self-harm expressing unbearable emotional pain. She felt suicidal regularly. Diana later described this period as the darkest of her life, when she felt completely trapped with no escape possible. The palace was literally a prison, and her marriage was a torture chamber. Charles's attitude toward Diana's suffering was callous. He viewed her mental health issues as manipulative behavior designed to control him or gain sympathy. The possibility that Diana was genuinely suffering because of his treatment didn't seem to occur to Charles, or if it did, didn't concern him. Charles had the emotional depth of someone raised by emotionally unavailable parents to suppress feelings and prioritize duty over relationships. The public narrative during this period still portrayed Charles and Diana as a functioning royal couple. Photographs showed them at events together, smiling and waving. Joint royal tours projected marital unity. The media largely accepted the palace's careful image management. Very few journalists understood or reported the marriage's actual state. The performance was succeeding even as the reality was catastrophic, but close observers noticed tensions. Body language at public events showed distance and discomfort. Diana's weight loss became alarming. Charles and Diana arrived and departed separately at events. Small signs accumulated for those paying attention. The marriage was dying publicly, just slowly and with careful concealment. Diana began seeking support outside the palace. She found a therapist who helped her understand her bulimia and depression. She developed friendships with people outside royal circles who valued her as a person, not a princess. She started recognizing that the problem wasn't her deficiency. It was the institution's toxicity and Charles's emotional abuse. This realization was liberating and terrifying simultaneously. Diana's growing independence threatened the palace's control. Staff reported her therapy sessions and outside friendships to senior officials. Charles was informed of Diana's activities and relationships. The surveillance increased. Diana was being monitored because she was developing the strength to resist institutional control. Her movement toward health and autonomy was interpreted as dangerous rebellion. Royal duties became battlegrounds. Charles and Diana were scheduled for joint appearances, but could barely tolerate each other's presence. Staff worked frantically to keep them apart, except when cameras required their proximity. The tours were meticulously choreographed to minimize actual interaction. The marriage had become a performance maintained through logistics and public relations rather than any authentic relationship. The Korea tour in 1992 was particularly disastrous. Photographs showed Charles and Diana sitting far apart, never touching, barely speaking. The media nicknamed them the Glums. Even the carefully managed royal image couldn't hide the obvious hostility. The tour's optics were so bad that it accelerated discussions about formally separating. The marriage facade was crumbling faster than palace PR could repair it. Diana's public persona was evolving. She was no longer the shy teenager who'd married Charles. She was becoming confident, assertive, and willing to challenge royal conventions. Diana started selecting her own clothes rather than accepting palace guidance. She pursued charitable work that interested her rather than fulfilling assigned duties. She was claiming agency within a system designed to suppress it. Charles resented every assertion of Diana's independence. He wanted a compliant wife who supported his work and stayed in the background. Diana was becoming a global icon whose popularity eclipsed Charles completely. The dynamic Charles had resented since the marriage began was intensifying. Diana was the star, and Charles was the supporting actor in what he believed was his show. Diana's charitable work became increasingly important to her identity and purpose. She visited homeless shelters, AIDS wards, and landmine victims. She touched people with HIV when public figures avoided physical contact. She held dying children and comforted the suffering. This work was genuine. Diana connected with suffering because she understood pain intimately. The compassion she showed others was what she desperately needed and never received. The media covered Diana's charitable work extensively, contrasting her warmth and engagement with Charles's formal, distant approach. Every appearance where Diana connected authentically with suffering people made Charles look cold and unfeeling by comparison. Diana wasn't trying to humiliate Charles through her charitable work. She was pursuing meaning and purpose. But the effect was to highlight their fundamental differences and Charles's inadequacies. By 1992, both Charles and Diana wanted out of the marriage, but neither could initiate divorce without damaging their positions. Charles needed to avoid appearing as the villain who abandoned his wife. Diana needed to protect her relationship with her sons and her public role. They were trapped together by competing interests and institutional constraints, making everyone miserable while maintaining a public charade. Andrew Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story, exploded into the stalemate in June 1992. The book revealed Diana's bulimia, suicide attempts, and Charles's affair with Camilla. It portrayed Diana as a victim of royal cruelty and Charles as an unfaithful husband. The palace initially denied Diana's cooperation with Morton, but the truth eventually emerged. Diana had secretly provided detailed information through an intermediary. Diana had weaponized the media against the institution that was destroying her. Media weaponed Diana's cooperation with Andrew Morton for Diana. Her true story represented a declaration of war against the royal family. She'd violated the fundamental rule of royal life: never explain, never complain. Diana wasn't just complaining. She was exposing the monarchy's cruelty, Charles's infidelity, and her own suffering in vivid detail. The book was a nuclear weapon detonated inside Buckingham Palace, and Diana had armed and triggered it herself. Morton's book included revelations that shocked the public. Diana's bulimia, described in clinical detail. Her suicide attempts, including throwing herself downstairs and cutting herself. Charles's affair with Camilla, documented through timeline and evidence. The Queen's indifference to Diana's suffering. The palace's institutional cruelty. Each revelation contradicted the fairy tale narrative the public had embraced and the palace had carefully maintained. The palace's initial response was denial. They claimed the book was fabricated, that Diana hadn't cooperated, that Morton was making sensational accusations to sell books. But the details were too specific, too intimate, too accurate. People who knew Diana recognized her voice in the quotes. The denial was transparent and desperate. The palace was scrambling to contain damage from a weapon they'd never anticipated. Diana's public response was carefully calibrated. She didn't acknowledge cooperation directly, but her body language and public appearances sent clear messages. When Morton's friend received an award, Diana attended, an implicit endorsement. When asked about the book, Diana said nothing but allowed speculation. She was maintaining plausible deniability while ensuring everyone knew the truth. The public reaction was divided. Many sympathized with Diana, seeing her as a victim of royal cruelty and an unfaithful husband. Others criticized her for airing private grievances publicly and violating royal protocol. But even critics couldn't ignore the revelations. The fairy tale was shattered. Diana had ensured that her suffering was visible, documented, and undeniable. Charles was humiliated and furious. The book portrayed him as a cold, unfaithful husband who'd driven his wife to bulimia and suicide attempts. His relationship with Camilla was exposed. His emotional distance and neglect were documented. Charles couldn't deny the accusations without looking defensive, but accepting them meant admitting to cruel behavior. He was trapped by truth. The Squidgygate tapes emerged around the same time, adding fuel to the fire. Recorded conversations between Diana and James Gilby included intimate endearments, Gilby calling Diana Squidgy and expressing affection. The tape suggested Diana had emotional relationships outside her marriage. For some, this confirmed Diana was as unfaithful as Charles. For others, it showed Diana seeking comfort denied in her marriage. Diana didn't deny the Squidgygate tapes' authenticity. She'd learned that denial simply prolonged scandals. Acknowledgement and moving forward proved more effective. Diana was developing media strategy sophistication. She understood that controlling narrative meant choosing what to acknowledge, what to deny, and what to ignore. The palace operated on denial and concealment. Diana was pioneering radical transparency. The war between Diana and the palace intensified throughout 1992. Each side leaked damaging information about the other. Palace sources portrayed Diana as unstable, manipulative, and difficult. Diana's allies highlighted Charles's infidelity and the institution's cruelty. The British press became a battlefield where the marriage corpse was dismembered publicly. Charles authorized Jonathan Dimbleby's biography, which would provide his counter-narrative. But this required waiting and planning. Diana had struck first and hardest. Charles was responding defensively to accusations rather than controlling the narrative. Diana had seized the initiative in their public relations war. The Queen finally intervened, recommending formal separation. The marriage was obviously dead. Continuing the charade was damaging the monarchy's reputation. Separation would acknowledge reality while stopping short of divorce. Elizabeth wrote to both Charles and Diana in December 1992, urging them to separate formally. The Queen was prioritizing institutional damage control over her son's marriage. The formal separation announcement came in December 1992. Prime Minister John Major announced to Parliament that Charles and Diana were separating, but had no plans to divorce. The separation was presented as mutual and amicable. Neither description was accurate, but official narratives rarely acknowledged messy truths. The fairy tale marriage was officially over. Diana's status after separation was ambiguous and contentious. She retained her title and royal status but lost some privileges and protections. Palace staff was reduced. Security was questioned. Her role in royal events became unclear. Diana was being pushed toward the margins, punished for her rebellion while the institution determined how to manage her long term. Diana responded by doubling down on her public work. If the palace was marginalizing her officially, she'd expand her public profile independently. Diana increased her charitable appearances, particularly work that generated positive media coverage. AIDS patients, homeless people, landmine victims, Diana sought out the suffering and brought cameras with her. Every appearance reminded the public why they loved her. The media coverage of separated Diana was intense and often invasive. Photographers stalked her constantly. Telephoto lenses captured her exercising at gyms. Paparazzi chased her car through London. Diana's privacy was completely violated, but she'd also contributed to this dynamic by using media strategically. She'd invited cameras into her life as a weapon against Charles. Now she couldn't make them leave. Diana began the relationship with Hasnat Khan during this period. Khan was a Pakistani heart surgeon, brilliant, private, and completely outside royal circles. Diana fell deeply in love, seeing in Khan the authentic connection she'd never had with Charles. The relationship was passionate and serious. Diana reportedly wanted to marry Khan and was willing to sacrifice her royal status for him. But Khan was uncomfortable with media attention and royal complications. He valued privacy that was impossible with Diana. The relationship was doomed by the fundamental incompatibility between Diana's public life and Khan's desire for normalcy. Diana was learning that her fame and status made normal relationships nearly impossible. She was trapped by the very public image she'd cultivated. Diana's interview with BBC Panorama in November 1995 was her most aggressive use of media as a weapon. She gave a lengthy, intimate interview discussing her marriage, Charles's affair, her bulimia, and her desire to be queen of people's hearts. The interview was devastating to the royal family and cemented Diana's public narrative as the wounded but resilient victim of royal cruelty. The interview included the famous line about there being 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Diana was directly accusing Charles and Camilla of adultery on national television. She acknowledged her own affair with James Hewitt, maintaining moral high ground by admitting her behavior while emphasizing it followed Charles's betrayal. Diana was controlling the narrative completely. Diana's admission that she'd suffered from bulimia and hurt her arms and her legs was revolutionary. British royalty didn't discuss mental health publicly. Diana was violating fundamental protocol, but her honesty was connecting with millions who'd experienced similar struggles. Diana was transforming from fairy tale princess into human being who suffered and survived. This authenticity made her dangerous to an institution built on mystique and distance. The palace was furious about the Panorama interview. Diana hadn't sought approval or informed them she was doing it. She'd arranged it independently, filmed at Kensington Palace, and controlled the content completely. The interview was Diana declaring independence from palace control. She was showing that she could reach the public directly, without royal mediation or approval. The Queen responded by demanding Charles and Diana divorce. The separation had become untenable. Diana was operating independently, using media to attack the institution and Charles. The situation needed resolution. Divorce would formally end the marriage and allow the royal family to move forward without Diana's interference. Elizabeth was cutting Diana loose. Diana negotiated the divorce carefully. She wanted to retain her title, maintain her role in William and Harry's lives, and secure financial independence. The final settlement gave her £17 million and maintained her public role. She lost the Her Royal Highness title but could still be called Princess Diana. She'd be inside the royal family's orbit but no longer part of its formal structure. The divorce was finalized in August 1996. Diana was now formally separated from the institution she'd married into at 19. She had her freedom, her son's love, substantial financial resources, and global fame. But she was also vulnerable, without official royal protection, navigating media attention that wouldn't diminish, and searching for purpose beyond her failed marriage and ended royal role. War declared after the divorce, Diana entered the most dangerous period of her life. She was officially outside the royal family's protection, but couldn't escape their reach. She remained the mother of the future king, giving her permanent connection to the institution while removing its obligation to protect her. Diana was simultaneously too famous to disappear and too independent to control. This combination made her a threat to the monarchy and vulnerable to those who saw her as a problem requiring solutions. Diana's post-divorce charitable work became more radical and politically engaged. She visited Angola with the Halo Trust, walking through minefields to highlight landmine dangers. The photographs of Diana in a protective visor walking among landmine warnings became iconic. She was using her fame to promote mine ban treaties, directly contradicting British government positions that opposed comprehensive bans. The British establishment was furious about Diana's landmine activism. Government ministers accused her of meddling in policy matters beyond her expertise. Defense contractors worried about losing profitable landmine sales. Diana was threatening economic and strategic interests with her humanitarian advocacy. The backlash revealed how threatening Diana had become to establishment interests. Diana refused to be intimidated. She continued her landmine work, visiting Bosnia and meeting survivors. She testified before American committees supporting mine ban legislation. Diana was leveraging her global fame for political purposes, becoming an activist rather than just a charitable figurehead. This evolution terrified the royal family and British establishment. Diana with political power was far more dangerous than Diana as a troubled princess. The palace's strategy for managing Diana shifted from containment to marginalization. They worked to reduce her public profile and diminish her influence. Palace sources leaked negative stories about Diana, that she was unstable, that she manipulated media, that she was a difficult mother. The campaign was subtle but persistent, attempting to undermine Diana's public image. Diana's response was to outwork and outshine the attacks. Every negative story was countered by a compelling public appearance or charitable initiative. Diana understood that public love was her armor. As long as people adored her, the palace couldn't destroy her credibly. She cultivated her image carefully while remaining genuinely engaged with her causes. The combination was powerful and frustrating to her enemies. Diana's relationship with the media became increasingly complicated. She needed press coverage to maintain public profile and support her causes. But the media attention was also invasive, dangerous, and often hostile. Paparazzi followed her everywhere. Tabloids published intrusive stories about her private life. Diana was trapped in a symbiotic relationship with media that both empowered and endangered her. The Morton book had been the first media weapon. The Panorama interview was the second. Diana threatened a third strike, writing her own memoir. She reportedly compiled notes and discussed book projects with publishers. The palace was terrified of what Diana might reveal in an unfiltered autobiography. Her cooperation with Morton had been devastating. Her own book could destroy the monarchy's carefully maintained image completely. Diana's knowledge of royal family secrets made her dangerous. She knew about Charles's relationship with Camilla from the beginning. She'd witnessed the family's cruelty and dysfunction firsthand. She understood how palace machinery operated, how scandals were concealed, and where bodies were buried. An honest Diana memoir would be explosive beyond anything previously published about the royals. The threat of Diana's potential revelations hung over the palace constantly. She could speak whenever she chose, reveal whatever she knew, and destroy reputations with testimony. Diana had nuclear options available: television interviews, books, documentaries. The palace couldn't control her anymore. They could only react to her actions and fear what she might do next. Diana's security situation became increasingly precarious after the divorce. She'd lost official royal protection officers. Private security she hired couldn't match government resources. Diana was one of the world's most photographed people, with inadequate protection from obsessive photographers and potentially dangerous individuals. She'd become a target without sufficient defenses. Diana reported feeling followed and watched constantly. She believed her phone was tapped and her residence monitored. Some dismissed this as paranoia, but intelligence agencies and palace security certainly had capabilities and potential motives for surveillance. Diana represented an unpredictable threat to the institution. Monitoring her activities made strategic sense from their perspective. The establishment's fear of Diana was multifaceted. She threatened royal family reputation through potential revelations. She undermined government policy through her activism. She competed with Charles for public affection, making him look inadequate. She represented change and modernity against tradition and hierarchy. Diana was dangerous because she was powerful, independent, and unwilling to be controlled. Some conspiracy theories suggest establishment figures wanted Diana eliminated. These theories lack credible evidence but reflect the genuine tensions between Diana and powerful institutions. Diana had made enemies among royalty, government ministers, defense contractors, and media proprietors. Whether these enemies wished her actual harm or simply wanted her silenced and marginalized is unknowable. What's certain is that Diana lived under extraordinary pressure from multiple directions. The palace wanted her quiet and compliant. The media wanted sensational stories. Paparazzi wanted photographs. Diana's own psychological struggles, the residual effects of bulimia, depression, and trauma, continued affecting her. She was fighting battles on multiple fronts while trying to find personal happiness and purpose. Diana's search for a sustainable romantic relationship after divorce proved difficult. Her relationship with Hasnet Khan ended because he couldn't handle the media attention. Brief relationships with other men were exposed and sensationalized immediately. Diana's fame made normal romance impossible. Every potential partner faced intense scrutiny, invasion of privacy, and public judgment. The relationship with Dodi Fayed began in summer 1997. Dodi was the son of Mohammed Al Fayed, the Egyptian billionaire who owned Harrods and the Ritz Paris. The relationship seemed unlikely. Dodi lacked Khan's substance and integrity, but he offered luxury, attention, and escape from the pressures Diana faced. The relationship may have been rebound romance or genuine connection. Diana didn't live long enough to clarify which it was. Mohammed Al Fayed had his own agenda. He'd been denied British citizenship despite substantial UK investments in social climbing. His relationship with the British establishment was contentious. Having his son date Diana, mother of the future king, provided social legitimacy Al Fayed craved. Whether Dodi genuinely cared for Diana or was performing filial duty is debatable. The Fayed family's wealth provided the resources for elaborate dates and privacy that Diana's previous relationships lacked. Dodi chartered yachts, rented villas, and arranged elaborate outings. The relationship looked glamorous in paparazzi photographs. Diana on yachts in the Mediterranean, relaxed and seemingly happy. After years of visible suffering, Diana appeared to be healing and moving forward. But the paparazzi attention was relentless and dangerous. Photographers followed Diana and Dodi constantly, competing for valuable photographs. High-speed chases through city streets became routine. Close calls with accidents occurred repeatedly. The hunt for Diana photographs was becoming genuinely dangerous, and everyone involved knew it. Nobody acted effectively to reduce the risks. Diana's final summer in 1997 was spent largely with the Fayed family. She vacationed with William and Harry on Mohammed Al Fayed's yacht, then continued seeing Dodi after her sons returned to the UK. The relationship was becoming serious, though whether it would have lasted is speculation. Diana was planning her future, considering her next chapters, and finally seeming to find happiness outside the royal prison she'd escaped. But danger was escalating with every passing day. The paparazzi were becoming more aggressive. Security was inadequate. Diana's enemies hadn't disappeared. The situation was spiraling toward catastrophe, and Diana was at the center of multiple forces: media obsession, establishment hostility, romantic complications, and her own psychological vulnerabilities. The combination was lethal. Dangerous freedom, the final year of Diana's life, demonstrated both the possibilities and perils of her freedom from royal constraints. She was pursuing causes that mattered to her, speaking freely, and living without palace approval. But this independence came without institutional protection or support. Diana was operating without a safety net, and the dangers she faced were increasing. Diana's landmine work culminated in her visit to Bosnia in August 1997, just weeks before her death. She walked through former battlefields, met with survivors who'd lost limbs to mines, and used her global platform to demand international action. The photographs from Bosnia showed Diana at her most committed, serious, engaged, using fame for political purpose. This was Diana operating at peak influence. The British government remained hostile to Diana's activism. Foreign Office officials publicly criticized her Bosnia visit, questioning whether she understood policy complexities. Defense industry representatives privately attacked her campaign. Diana was threatening profitable weapons sales and established defense policies. Her effectiveness as an advocate made her dangerous to entrenched interests. Diana ignored the criticism and continued working. She planned visits to other mine-affected countries. She coordinated with advocacy organizations promoting mine ban treaties. Diana had found purpose beyond royal duties, using her fame to pressure governments and save lives. This work gave her meaning that her failed marriage and royal role never had. But the activism also increased her vulnerability. Diana was making enemies among powerful people who preferred she stay quiet and decorative. Defense contractors, government officials, and royal family members all had reasons to want Diana's influence curtailed. Whether this translated into active threats or simply hostile attitudes is unclear, but Diana operated in increasingly dangerous territory. Diana's relationship with her sons remained her greatest priority and deepest joy. William and Harry provided unconditional love and kept her grounded. Diana was determined to give them normal childhoods despite royal constraints. She took them to McDonald's, theme parks, and homeless shelters, exposing them to normal life and human suffering. Diana was raising future royals who understood the world beyond palace walls. The palace tolerated Diana's unconventional parenting while she was married to Charles. After the divorce, they questioned her judgment more aggressively. Palace courtiers suggested Diana was damaging the princes by exposing them to inappropriate situations. Diana was fighting ongoing battles over custody, access, and parenting approaches. The institution that had failed her was now questioning her mothering. Diana's mental health had improved substantially after escaping the marriage. Her bulimia was largely under control. She was no longer self-harming. Therapy had helped her understand her trauma and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Diana was healing from the psychological damage inflicted by her childhood abandonment and royal marriage. Freedom was therapeutic, but healing wasn't complete and vulnerabilities remained. Diana could still be impulsive, especially in relationships. Her judgment about people sometimes failed her. The need for love and validation that made her vulnerable to Charles's manipulation could emerge in other relationships. Diana was stronger but not invulnerable. She remained a wounded person navigating a dangerous world. The summer romance with Dodi Fade seemed to provide happiness and escape. Photographs showed Diana laughing, relaxed, and affectionate. After years of photographed suffering, the sad dye images that defined her marriage, these pictures suggested healing and joy. The public embraced this narrative, happy to see Diana happy after so much visible pain. But the relationship's seriousness is debatable. Diana had been with Dodi for only weeks. The relationship was geographically scattered, conducted primarily on vacation settings. Whether it would have survived return to normal life is questionable. Some friends suggested Diana was enjoying attention and luxury but wasn't deeply committed. Others believed she was genuinely falling in love. Diana didn't live long enough to clarify which interpretation was accurate. The paparazzi attention reached dangerous levels during Diana's final summer. Photographers chased her car through streets at high speeds. They used telephoto lenses to photograph her on private property. They bribed staff for information about her movements. The hunt for Diana photographs was out of control, and everyone involved, photographers, editors, Diana herself, bore responsibility for the escalation. Diana's complicated relationship with media attention contributed to the danger. She'd used paparazzi strategically, ensuring they photographed her charitable work and flattering moments. But she also wanted privacy, particularly in romantic relationships. Diana wanted to control when she was photographed but couldn't. The photographers she'd cultivated as allies when useful became predators she couldn't escape. The paparazzi economics were straightforward. Diana photographs sold for enormous sums. A good picture of Diana could earn a photographer tens of thousands of pounds. Exclusive photographs of Diana with a new romantic partner were worth even more. This created intense competition among photographers and incentivized dangerous behavior. The most aggressive photographers won the valuable pictures. Diana complained about paparazzi harassment repeatedly. She begged editors to call off the photographers. She pleaded with the public to stop buying magazines that published invasive photographs. But the machine had its own momentum. Readers bought publications featuring Diana. Publishers paid photographers for Diana pictures. Photographers chased Diana ever more aggressively. The cycle was self-reinforcing and deadly. Security arrangements for Diana were inadequate and disorganized. After losing official royal protection, Diana relied on private security that varied in quality and capability. When staying with the Fades, she used their security team, which was well-resourced but unfamiliar with her specific needs. Nobody coordinated security comprehensively. Diana was protected inconsistently by people with competing priorities and approaches. The Ritz Paris security staff were employed by Mohammed Al-Fayed. Their primary loyalty was to their employer, not Diana. When Diana and Dodi needed to evade paparazzi, the security team made decisions serving Al-Fayed family interests rather than optimal safety protocols. The decision to use Henry Paul as a driver, despite questions about his sobriety and qualifications, reflected disorganized security arrangements. Diana's final weeks showed someone trying to build a new life while navigating continuing dangers and complications. She was planning her autumn schedule, including more landmine work and potential television projects. She was considering her long-term future, including where she'd live and what causes she'd champion. Diana was looking forward, not back, when her life ended. The vacation aboard the Al-Fayed yacht with William and Harry was reportedly joyful. Diana spent quality time with her sons, swimming, laughing, and relaxing. The boys returned to the UK in late August, and Diana continued her vacation with Dodi. She was planning to return to London soon to prepare for William and Harry's return to school. Diana's final days were spent in the Mediterranean, unaware that she was living her last hours. Final hours, August 30, 1997. Diana and Dodi spent the day in Paris, shopping and visiting Dodi's apartment. They were planning to return to London the next day. Paparazzi followed them throughout the day, photographing every movement. The attention was constant and invasive, but not unusual for Diana. She dealt with similar harassment for 16 years. This day seemed no different from hundreds before. The couple had dinner at El Espadon restaurant in the Ritz Paris, owned by Mohammed Al-Fayed. They dined privately, then retreated to the imperial suite to avoid the paparazzi gathering outside. Diana and Dodi were trapped. They couldn't leave the hotel without running the gauntlet of photographers. The security team developed a plan to evade the cameras using a decoy vehicle and alternate exit. Henry Paul, the Ritz's acting security chief, was called back to the hotel to drive Diana and Dodi. Paul had been drinking. His blood alcohol level was later measured at 3 times the legal limit. He'd also taken prescription drugs that shouldn't be mixed with alcohol. Paul was in no condition to drive, but nobody prevented him from getting behind the wheel. This decision was the first in a chain of failures that led to catastrophe. The plan was for Diana and Dodi to exit through the Ritz's rear entrance while decoy vehicles left through the front, drawing the paparazzi away. Paul would drive them to Dodi's apartment in a Mercedes S280. The strategy relied on speed and surprise, getting away before photographers could follow. Nobody considered the risks of high-speed driving through Paris with an impaired driver. Diana and Dodi left the Ritz at 12:20 a.m. on August 31. Paparazzi immediately recognized the plan and gave chase on motorcycles and cars. Paul accelerated, trying to outrun the photographers. The Mercedes raced through Paris streets at dangerous speeds, running red lights and weaving through traffic. The paparazzi pursued, determined not to lose the valuable photograph opportunity. The Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel along the Seine River at approximately 12:23 a.m. Paul was driving at high speed. Estimates suggest 65 mph in a 30 mph zone. A white Fiat Uno was ahead in the tunnel. Exactly what happened next is disputed, but the Mercedes clipped the Fiat, lost control, and struck a tunnel pillar at devastating speed. The impact was catastrophic. Dodi Fayed and Henry Paul died instantly. Their injuries were unsurvivable. Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard in the front passenger seat, was critically injured but survived. Diana was injured severely but alive. She was trapped in the wreckage, unconscious and bleeding internally. The impact had torn major blood vessels. Diana was dying but could potentially be saved with immediate, expert medical intervention. The paparazzi who'd been chasing Diana arrived at the crash scene within seconds. Instead of immediately calling for help or rendering aid, some photographed the wreckage. This behavior was later cited as evidence of paparazzi's callous prioritization of photographs over human lives. Other photographers did call emergency services, but the initial response was delayed while photographers documented the scene. Emergency responders arrived and began treating Diana at the scene. French emergency protocols emphasized stabilizing patients before transport rather than immediate evacuation to hospitals. Doctors worked on Diana inside the wreckage, and then in the ambulance for extended periods, before beginning the journey to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. The transport took nearly an hour for a trip that should have required minutes. Whether different emergency protocols would have saved Diana is debated. Some experts argue that immediate transport to a hospital with surgical capabilities might have enabled life-saving interventions. Others contend Diana's injuries were too severe regardless of response speed. The question remains unresolved, but the extended on-scene treatment and slow transport certainly didn't help. Diana arrived at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital at 2:06 a.m. Surgeons operated desperately, trying to repair the damage to her heart and major blood vessels. They fought for her life for hours, but the injuries were too extensive. Diana's heart had been severely damaged. Internal bleeding was massive. At 4:00 a.m. on August 31, 1997, doctors pronounced Diana dead. She was 36 years old. The news spread globally within hours. The world woke to headlines announcing Diana's death. Disbelief and shock were universal. Diana had been young, vibrant, and seemingly indestructible despite all she'd endured. Her sudden death in a car accident seemed incomprehensible. The fairy tale princess was dead, killed while fleeing photographers in a Paris tunnel. The British royal family was at Balmoral Castle in Scotland when they received the news. Their response was formal and controlled, classic Windsor emotional suppression. Charles was informed and told William and Harry their mother was dead. The Queen decided they'd attend church that morning as scheduled, maintaining normal routine despite the catastrophe. The decision appeared cold and generated public criticism. The public response was unprecedented emotional outpouring. People who'd never met Diana wept openly. Flowers began appearing at Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace, eventually creating an ocean of tributes. The grief was genuine and overwhelming. Diana had connected with millions who saw her as a relatable figure who'd suffered and survived before dying tragically young. The conspiracy theories began immediately. How could a protected Mercedes crash in a routine tunnel? Why were there no security cameras in the tunnel? Were the paparazzi actually chasing her? Or was this cover for assassination? What about the white Fiat Uno that was never definitively identified? Could British intelligence or others have arranged Diana's death to silence a dangerous woman? Official investigations, French judicial inquiry, British Operation Paget, and a formal inquest concluded that Diana died from injuries sustained in a drunk driving accident while pursued by paparazzi. Henry Paul's intoxication, excessive speed, and the paparazzi chase combined to cause the crash. No evidence supported assassination theories. The crash was a tragic accident, not a conspiracy. But conspiracy theories persist because they provide meaning for meaningless tragedy. Diana couldn't have died from something as banal as drunk driving. Her death must have significance, must have resulted from her enemies eliminating a threat. The conspiracy theories reflect unwillingness to accept that Diana survived royal cruelty and emerged as a force for change only to die in a preventable accident. The funeral on September 6, 1997, was a global event. Westminster Abbey service was attended by dignitaries and celebrities from around the world. An estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide watched on television. The funeral procession through London streets drew over 1 million people. The collective grief was extraordinary and historic. The image of William and Harry, aged 15 and 12, walking behind their mother's coffin became iconic and heartbreaking. The boys Diana had loved fiercely were publicly mourning her death while cameras captured every moment. The same media that had pursued Diana relentlessly now documented her son's grief. The exploitation continued even in death. Earl Spencer's eulogy for his sister was powerful and accusatory. He criticized the media for hounding Diana to death. He implicitly condemned the royal family for their treatment of her. He promised that the Spencer family would protect William and Harry's heritage and help them understand their mother. The speech was simultaneously tribute and attack, honoring Diana while calling out those who'd harmed her. Elton John's performance of Candle in the Wind, rewritten for Diana, became the funeral's emotional climax. The song captured Diana's tragedy, a beautiful, vulnerable woman destroyed by fame and public fascination. The performance moved millions to tears and became forever associated with Diana's memory. Diana was buried at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate, on an island in an ornamental lake. The location provided privacy and protection from the public intrusion Diana had endured in life. She rests there still, away from the institution that had exploited her and the media that had killed her. In the aristocratic world she'd been born into before becoming the most famous woman on earth. The aftermath of Diana's death forced reconsiderations of media practices, paparazzi behavior, and royal family treatment of individuals. Privacy laws were strengthened. Paparazzi tactics faced greater scrutiny. The royal family recognized they needed to modernize and connect more authentically with the public. Diana's death became a catalyst for changes she'd advocated while living. But Diana wasn't alive to see these changes. She didn't get to watch William and Harry grow into the men she'd hoped they'd become. She didn't get to continue her humanitarian work or pursue her causes. She didn't get to find lasting love or build the life she deserved after escaping her disastrous marriage. Diana was robbed of her future at 36, killed, while pursuing the freedom she'd finally achieved. The dark story behind Diana's life was institutional cruelty, media exploitation, and the systematic destruction of a vulnerable young woman who'd married into a system designed to use and discard her. Diana fought back, wielding media as a weapon against those who'd harmed her, pursuing meaningful work despite opposition, and creating authentic connections despite living in the world's most inauthentic institution. She shook a monarchy by being human in an inhuman system, and she paid for that authenticity with her life, dying while fleeing the cameras she'd both needed and feared, leaving behind 2 sons and a world that would never stop mourning the princess who became the people's champion before becoming a tragedy that could have been prevented.